I'm sorry. You have 6 months to live, the doctor said. My children wept, hugging me, promising to cherish every last moment. But that night, I overheard them whispering, not about my care, but about how quickly they could sell my assets. So I made a call. "Doctor," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Phase 1 was a success. Begin Phase 2. They thought they were racing against my clock. They had no idea I was the one winding it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments." Phase 2. It sounds so cold, so clinical. But the plan, this grand, final deception of my life, was not born from a cold heart. It was forged in the fires of a broken one. To understand why a father would orchestrate such a cruel test for his own children, you must first understand the man I used to be, and the promise I made to the woman who knew me best. For 30 years, in the ruthless world of corporate negotiations and hostile takeovers, they called me the magician, not because I pulled rabbits out of hats, but because I could make liabilities disappear and assets materialize out of thin air. I was a business strategist. My art was not in building things, but in understanding people, their fears, their ambitions, their blind spots. I could read a negotiation table like a map, seeing the hidden paths to victory where others saw only dead ends. I was a master of the long game, of setting intricate traps that my opponents would walk into, smiling, believing it was their own idea. It was a lucrative, powerful, and ultimately a lonely profession. My sanctuary, my escape from that world of calculated deception, was my wife, Eleanor. She was my opposite in every way. She was the heart of our family, a woman of profound empathy and unwavering integrity. She saw the world not as a game to be won, but as a garden to be tended. She was the one who kept me grounded, who reminded me that the greatest assets in life are not listed on any balance sheet. She never fully approved of my profession. I remember a conversation we had after I had closed a particularly brutal deal, dismantling a competitor through a series of psychological maneuvers. "You were brilliant, Arthur," she had said, her voice quiet, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "But were you kind?" The question had haunted me. "It's a tough world, my love," I had replied, the excuse sounding hollow even to me. "Sometimes you have to be a shark to survive." Or, she had countered gently, "you could choose to swim in different waters." She was, as always, right. After she passed, the world of corporate warfare lost its allure. The thrill of the game was gone, replaced by the echoing silence of our home. I retired, content to live a quiet life, to manage my own investments, and to watch my children, David and Emily, navigate the world I had helped create for them. I had given them everything: the best education, trust funds, seed money for their own ventures. I had given them a life free from the struggles and the sharp edges I had known. I thought I was giving them a gift. I realized too late that I had actually been giving them a poison. Wealth without wisdom, ambition without foundation. They had inherited my intelligence, but not my patience. They saw the world as I once had, as a game, but they had never bothered to learn the rules. They only wanted to claim the prize. The first signs were small, almost excusable acts of youthful entitlement. David, my son, would present business plans that were little more than thinly veiled requests for money to fund a lavish lifestyle. Emily, my daughter, would speak of her brand, her social media presence, as if it were a tangible asset, her self-worth measured in likes and followers. I would try to guide them, to share the lessons I had learned. A business isn't just a balance sheet, David, I would tell him after another of his ventures failed. It's a promise to your employees, to your customers. It's about building trust. He would just nod impatiently, his eyes already on the next shiny object. You don't get it, Dad. It's a different world now. It's about speed, disruption. A reputation takes a lifetime to build, Emily, I would advise her after a minor social media scandal. And only a moment to destroy. Be mindful of the words you use. Oh, Dad, she would laugh. You're so old-fashioned. Controversy creates engagement. It's all part of the game. They saw my advice not as wisdom, but as the ramblings of a man who was out of touch. And as the years passed, their quiet dismissal of my values grew into a more overt, greedy impatience. They began to see me not as their father, but as a custodian, a caretaker of the vast fortune that they believed was rightfully and imminently theirs. They would talk about my estate in front of me, in hushed but audible tones, debating which charities to honor my memory with, which vacation homes they would keep. They were waiting for me to die, and they were not particularly subtle about it. It was my wife's final words that spurred me to action. In her last lucid moments, she had made me promise. They are good at heart, Arthur, she had whispered, her hand frail in mine. But they are lost. They are drowning in the very comfort we created for them. Don't just leave them your money. Leave them a lesson. Use your gifts, your magic. Design one final game for them. A game they have to win, not with money, but with character. It's the only inheritance that will truly save them. Her words became my final project. The magician would come out of retirement for one last performance. The plan was audacious, risky, and perhaps a little cruel. But it was born from a desperate, paternal love. I met with my oldest and most trusted friend, Dr. Evans. He was not just my doctor. He was a man who had known me for 40 years, a man who had seen the toll my profession had taken on me, and the toll my children's behavior was now taking. I laid out the entire insane plan. He listened, his face a mask of professional calm. When I had finished, he was silent for a long time. You are asking me to risk my medical license, Arthur, he finally said. I am, I replied. I am asking you to help me save my children from themselves. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not a doctor, but a friend. All right, magician, he sighed. Let's set the stage. Phase 1 of the plan was all about the performance, and the stage was Dr. Evans's sterile, quiet office. I had spent weeks preparing, studying medical journals, and rehearsing with him. Dr. Evans, for his part, was a masterful actor. He had created a set of forged medical records, X-rays, and lab results that were utterly convincing, a paper trail of a fictional aggressive illness that was both rare and, conveniently, difficult for a layman to question. My children, David and Emily, sat opposite us, their faces a perfect pantomime of worried concern. I had summoned them for an urgent family meeting regarding my health, a lure they could not resist. Dr. Evans began, his voice grave, professional, and filled with a carefully measured dose of sympathy. He spoke of inconclusive tests, of aggressive cellular activity, of limited therapeutic options. He used a vocabulary of complex medical jargon that was designed to sound both authoritative and terrifying. I watched my children. They nodded, along, their brows furrowed, playing the part of a loving, concerned family beautifully. Finally, Dr. Evans delivered the final devastating line we had rehearsed so many times. I've consulted with specialists at the Mayo Clinic, he said, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose in a gesture of weary finality. And I'm afraid the prognosis is not good. We're looking at a timeline of approximately 6 months, Arthur. I am so sorry. The silence in the room was thick, heavy. And then the performance from my children began. Emily let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth. David rushed to my side, putting a comforting proprietary arm around my shoulder. No, he whispered, his voice cracking with feigned disbelief. Dad, no, there must be something we can do. Another opinion? Experimental treatments? We'll pay whatever it takes. We've explored all the viable options, David, Dr. Evans said gently. At this stage, the focus should be on comfort, on quality of life. 6 months. Emily wept, burying her face in her hands. It's not enough time. It's not enough time with him. They were magnificent. Their grief was so convincing, so perfectly pitched, that for a fleeting, insane moment, I almost believed it myself. I played my part, slumping in my chair, my face a mask of shock and weary resignation. I allowed them to comfort me, to hold my hand, to whisper empty, loving platitudes in my ear. That evening they insisted on staying with me at my house, to take care of me. They made me dinner, fluffed my pillows, and spoke in hushed, reverent tones. It was the most attention they had paid to me in over a decade. "Don't you worry about a thing, Dad," David said, tucking a blanket around me as I sat in my armchair. "Emily and I will handle everything. The company, the estate, all of it. You just focus on resting." "Your mother would be so proud of you both," I murmured, my voice deliberately weak. The true performance, however, began after they thought I was asleep. I had a small, discreet listening device, a tool from my old corporate espionage days, placed in the living room. From my bedroom, I listened as their hushed, caring tones were replaced by the cold, sharp whispers of predators. "Did you believe it?" Emily's voice was the first I heard, stripped of all its tearful sorrow. "Evans was convincing," David replied. "And Dad, he looks terrible. He's bought it completely. The old man is checking out." 6 months, Emily mused, a chilling, practical tone in her voice. "It's a tight timeline. We need to move fast. The housing market is at a peak. We need to get the house listed immediately before his condition becomes public knowledge. It could affect the price." "I've already spoken to a real estate agent," David said, his voice a low, conspiratorial hum. "She's discreet. She'll list it as a private sale. As for his art collection, I have a buyer lined up, a private collector, from Zurich. He'll take the whole lot for a lump sum, no questions asked. We'll lose a little on the value, but we gain speed. We need liquidity, Emily. My art collection, a lifetime of carefully chosen pieces, each one a memory of a trip with Eleanor, a shared discovery, a moment of beauty. And he was going to sell it off like a commodity, a bundle of assets to be liquidated. "What about the company?" she asked. "The board is already on our side," he said with a dismissive wave I could almost hear. "With Dad's diagnosis, invoking the emergency succession clause will be a formality. I'll have full control by the end of the month. We'll start by selling off the less profitable divisions, streamline the assets." Streamline the assets. He meant he would fire the loyal, long-term employees, the people who had been the bedrock of our company, to make the balance sheet look more attractive for a quick, profitable sale. He wasn't going to run the company. He was going to gut it. Lay in my bed, the cold, hard words of my children drilling into my heart. There was no grief in their voices, no sadness, only the cold, reptilian calculus of greed. They were not my children anymore. They were scavengers, circling, waiting for the lion to finally die so they could pick the carcass clean. The plan I had made, the one I had thought was a cruel but necessary lesson, now felt wholly, absolutely justified. Eleanor had been right. This was not just about teaching them a lesson. This was about saving her legacy from the very people we had created it for. Phase 1 was a success. They had taken the bait. Now it was time to let them run with it, to let them gorge themselves on their own greed. It was time for Phase 2. The days that followed were the most surreal and painful performance of my life. I became a ghost in my own home, a silent, fading spectator to the brisk and efficient dismantling of my world. My children, energized by their ticking clock, moved with a ruthless speed. The real estate agent arrived first, a woman with a predatory smile and eyes that appraised every room not for its warmth, but for its square footage. "The market is incredibly hot right now," she'd said to David and Emily while I sat in my armchair pretending to be half asleep. "With a motivated seller, we can have this sold and closed within 60 days. We'll list it as an estate sale. It adds a sense of urgency. An estate sale." They were selling my life before I had even finished living it. Then came the art appraiser, a cold, clinical man who walked through my home, the home Eleanor and I had filled with a lifetime of beauty, and attached price tags to our memories. He spoke in a detached jargon of provenance and market value, reducing a Monet landscape that Eleanor and I had bought on our 25th anniversary in Paris to a simple number on a clipboard. "The collection is impressive," he told my children. "Liquidated quickly, as a single lot you could expect to clear 2, maybe 3 million. An auction would yield more, but it would take time." "We don't have time," David had replied, his voice firm. "Sell it. All of it." Through it all, they maintained their flawless performance of filial devotion. They would bring me my meals on a tray, simple, bland food they thought was appropriate for a sick man. They would sit with me in the evenings, not talking but scrolling through their phones, their thumbs flying as they managed the logistics of my erasure. Every now and then they would look up, remember their role, and offer a gesture of manufactured affection. "How are you feeling, Dad?" Emily would ask, her voice a perfect imitation of loving concern as she placed a cold hand on my forehead. "Do you need anything?" "Just your company, sweetheart," I would murmur, my voice deliberately weak. "That's all I need." The lie tasted like poison in my mouth. They spoke to me in the slow, patronizing tones one uses with a confused child or a pet. "Now, Dad, we're going to have some people come by to look at the furniture today," David would say, kneeling beside my chair. "Don't you worry about a thing. We'll handle everything. You just rest." They believed I was oblivious, that my mind, clouded by illness and grief, couldn't comprehend their actions. They had no idea that my mind was clearer than it had been in years, that I was observing their every move, every word, every lie, with the cold, detached precision of a strategist watching his opponents move their pieces exactly where he wants them to go. The hardest part was the performance of my own physical decline. With Dr. Evans's guidance, I began to subtly manifest the symptoms of my fictional illness. I would feign moments of weakness, of breathlessness. I would allow a tremor to enter my hands when I lifted a glass of water. I would forget names, dates, small details, allowing my children to helpfully correct me, their faces a mask of pity and sorrow that barely concealed their triumphant glee. "It's happening faster than Evans predicted," I overheard David whispering to Emily one night. "He's fading. We need to get the final paperwork in order, the will, the power of attorney. We need to get him to sign while he's still lucid enough." That was their goal, the final checkmate. They needed my signature to grant them absolute control, to make the sale of the company and the final liquidation of my assets a smooth legal formality. And so, phase 2 of my plan began, moving silently. In the background, a powerful undercurrent beneath the surface of their frantic activity. While they were busy selling my life, I was busy buying it back. The real estate agent they had hired, a woman known for her aggressive, cutthroat tactics, had a weakness I had discovered during my years in business. She was deeply in debt to a private equity firm, a firm that, through a series of shell corporations, I happened to be the majority anonymous owner of. I made a single, quiet phone call to the firm's director. I explained the situation. I did not ask him to fire her. I gave him a more subtle, more powerful instruction. He was to call her and inform her that her outstanding loans were being called in, due in full in 30 days. Unless, of course, she could bring the firm an exceptional off-market deal. Something like, for example, a prime piece of real estate, sold quickly and for at least 30% below its market value. The art collector from Zurich was an even simpler matter. He was a man I had done business with years ago, a man who owed me a significant favor. I called him. I told him my children would be in touch, offering him my collection at a bargain price. I instructed him to buy it, without negotiation, and to hold it in a secure, climate-controlled vault in my name. The money for the purchase, of course, would be secretly supplied by me. They thought they were selling my assets to strangers. In reality, they were engaged in a series of beautifully orchestrated transactions with myself. They were the perfect middlemen in the quiet, methodical process of me consolidating my own estate. The money they were so eagerly accumulating in. A joint bank account was, in fact, my own money, simply being moved from one of my pockets to another. They were not just the antagonists in my story. They had become the unwitting employees in my grand final illusion. The magician was back, at work. The first sign that their carefully constructed timeline was beginning to unravel came from the real estate agent. She called David, her voice a frantic, nervous whisper that I, of course, overheard from the listening device in the living room. "David, we have a problem," she said. "The private equity firm that holds my commercial loans, they're calling them in, all of them. They're giving me 30 days to pay or I'm ruined. I need to close a major deal fast. This estate sale of your father's house needs to happen now, and it needs to be cheap." I smiled. The first domino had fallen exactly as I had planned. I had created a sense of desperation in their agent, a desperation she would now transfer directly to my son. "What do you mean, cheap?" David's voice was sharp with alarm. "We were expecting at least $4 million. "Forget $4 million, she snapped. "I have a buyer, an investment group. They're offering $3 million, cash, but they want to close in 10 days. It's a lowball offer, but it's a guaranteed fast closing. In your father's condition, a prolonged open market sale is a risk. Take the deal, David. It's the only clean exit you have." He hung up, and I could hear him pacing the room like a caged tiger. $3 million, a full million less than he had been fantasizing about. The pressure was mounting. A few days later, the second crack appeared. The art collector from Zurich sent a formal, notarized email. He confirmed his interest in the collection, but stated that due to the significant value and historical importance of the pieces, his insurance underwriters required a final, authenticated signature from the original owner, me, on the bill of sale. He would not release the funds until he had it. It was a beautiful move, a small, elegant checkmate I had arranged with my old friend. He was providing them with a legitimate, unquestionable reason why my signature was an absolute necessity. I listened that night as David and Emily argued, their voices no longer the confident whispers of conspirators, but the panicked hisses of cornered animals. "He has to sign, Emily," David insisted. "The art deal, the house sale. Everything is stalled until we have his signature on a full power of attorney. We need to control the estate now." "But he's getting worse," Emily fretted. "He was so confused today he called me Martha. What if he's no longer legally competent to sign? What if we've waited too long?" That was my cue. The next morning I staged my most convincing performance yet. I accidentally left the stove on, filling the kitchen with the smell of burning toast. I appeared in the living room looking utterly lost, asking them what year it was. I was pushing them, creating a terrifying deadline. Get the signature now, or risk losing everything because their target had become too incompetent to be legally manipulated. Their panic was palpable. They knew they were in a race against my declining health. And it was out of that panic that their final monstrous idea was born. They approached me that evening, their faces a perfect, somber mask of loving concern. It was Emily who spoke, her voice soft and gentle, the voice of a daughter about to deliver a loving eulogy to a man who was still alive. "Dad," she began, taking my hand, "we've been thinking. You've lived such an incredible life. You've built so much. And We don't want to just let you fade away in a quiet room. We want to celebrate you." "Celebrate me?" I asked, my voice a weak, tired whisper. "Yes," David said, kneeling beside me, his eyes shining with a fake, earnest light. "We want to throw you a party, a living farewell, a chance for all your friends, your old colleagues, everyone whose life you've touched, to come and say goodbye properly. A final grand celebration of the life of Arthur the Magician Sterling." It was a breathtakingly cynical move. A farewell party, a public spectacle designed, for one purpose, to be the emotional stage upon which they would get me to sign the final papers. They would surround me with friends, with memories, with the emotional weight of my own life. And in that moment of manufactured sentimentality, they would slide a pen into my hand and ask me to sign away my entire existence. They were planning to use my life story as the final weapon in their psychological war. I looked at their eager, predatory faces, at their eyes gleaming with the thrill of their own cleverness. They thought this was their idea, their brilliant final move. They had no idea they were walking directly into the grand finale that I had been designing for weeks. "A party," I said, a tear I didn't have to fake rolling down my cheek. That would be the most wonderful thing in the world. The week leading up to the farewell party was one of the most bizarre and emotionally draining of my life. It was a week of living in two parallel realities. In one reality, I was the dying patriarch, the guest of honor at my own living wake. In the other, I was the secret general, meticulously preparing the battlefield for a decisive victory. My children threw themselves into the party, planning with a manic, almost ghoulish energy. They saw it as the final hurdle, the last performance, before they could claim their prize. They wanted the event to be perfect, a grand testament to their supposed love and devotion. They hired the city's most exclusive event planner, booked the grand ballroom at a 5-star hotel, and spent a fortune, my fortune, of course, on flowers, champagne, and a string quartet. They would consult with me on the details, their voices, filled with a cloying, condescending sweetness. "Dad, we're working on the guest list," Emily would say, a tablet in her hand. "Are there any old friends from the firm you'd like us to invite? We want everyone who was important to you to be there." "That's so thoughtful, sweetheart," I would reply, my voice a frail whisper. And I would give them a name that was not just a friend, but a key player in my hidden plan. "What about Frank Miller, our old lawyer? I haven't seen him in years. It would be wonderful to see him one last time." "Of course, Dad," she'd say, tapping his name into the list, completely unaware that she had just invited the man who was currently drafting the legal notices that would seal her and her brother's fate. "And David," I would say to my son, "the video tribute they are preparing, could you make sure they include a picture of your mother and me, the one from the groundbreaking of the Henderson Tower?" "Absolutely, Dad," he'd say, his eyes gleaming. He thought I was being sentimental. He had no idea I was deliberately choosing the very project he had sabotaged, a subtle historical reference that would become devastatingly relevant later in the evening. Every one of their preparations was a move in their game, and every one of my sentimental requests was a counter-move in mine. They thought they were building a stage for my peaceful surrender. I was, in fact, helping them build a courtroom for their public trial. While they were busy with florists and caterers, my own preparations were of a different nature. My secret command center was a small, soundproofed conference room in Dr. Evans's private clinic. It was there that I met with my small, loyal war council. There was Dr. Evans, my steadfast friend, who would play the crucial role of the concerned physician, ready to provide a medical update at the appropriate moment. There was Frank Miller, our lawyer, who had prepared a devastating legal portfolio. He had the irrefutable evidence from the secret audit, the details of the shell companies, the proof of the Henderson Tower sabotage. He also had the real will and the legal documents for the company that I had secretly bought back. He was my legal artillery. And there was a new, crucial ally, a young, brilliant documentary filmmaker named Sarah Chen. She was the granddaughter of one of my oldest friends, a woman with a passion for truth and a reputation for fearless investigative journalism. I had reached out to her, telling her I had a story, a final grand illusion I was about to stage, a story about corporate greed and family betrayal. I promised her exclusive, unprecedented access. She, smelling the story of a lifetime, had agreed immediately. Our plan was to turn their party into my documentary. Sarah's small, discreet camera crew would be disguised as the official event photographers and videographers. Every fake smile, every crocodile tear, every self-congratulatory speech would be captured, not for a sentimental family video, but for a feature-length expose. The key, I explained to them in our final strategy meeting, is timing. We must let them play out their entire performance. We must let them build their pedestal of lies as high as possible. The higher they climb, the harder they will fall. We choreographed the evening with the precision of a military operation. Sarah's cameras would be positioned to capture every angle. Dr. Evans would be seated at a table near the stage, ready to be called upon. Frank Miller would wait in the wings, his briefcase full of legal thunder. My role was the most difficult. I had to be the dying man. I had to be the grateful, slightly confused father, overwhelmed by his children's love. I had to watch them, listen to them, and not let the rage in my heart show on my face. The night before the party, Emily came to my room. She brought me a glass of warm milk, just as she had when she was a little girl. She sat on the edge of my bed, her face a perfect portrait of sorrowful devotion. "Are you scared, Dad?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. The question was so filled with a chilling, manipulative intimacy, it almost took my breath away. I looked at her, at this stranger who was my daughter, and I played my part. "A little," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But I'm not afraid of the end. I'm just so grateful to have you and David here with me. I'm so proud of you both." She smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. She squeezed my hand. "We're proud of you too, Dad," she said. She then left the room, closing the door softly behind her, leaving her father to his final night of peace, completely unaware that he was perfectly healthy and that she was the one whose world was about to end. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of expensive, insincere grief. Towering floral arrangements, predominantly white lilies, filled the air with a cloying, funereal scent. A massive, tastefully edited video montage played on a loop on giant screens, showing a curated history of my life. Me as a young, dynamic executive. Me with Eleanor. Me as a proud father with two adoring, innocent children. The images were real, but the context was a lie. This was not a celebration of my life. It was the marketing campaign for my death. I was seated at the head table in a large, throne-like armchair, a blanket draped over my knees. I was the guest of honor, the dying king. David and Emily flanked me, playing their parts to perfection. They would lean in, whispering comforting words, adjusting my blanket, offering me a sip of water, all while Sarah Chen's disguised camera crew captured every moment of their filial devotion. The guests, a hand-picked audience of business associates, society figures, and a few distant, unsuspecting relatives, would look on with teary-eyed admiration. "They are such wonderful children," I heard a woman whisper at a nearby table. "So devoted to their father in his final days." The first part of the evening was a series of nauseatingly saccharine speeches. Friends of David and Emily, clearly coached, came to the podium to speak of the family's incredible bond. They spoke of David's strength and Emily's compassion. They spoke of how inspiring it was to see them rally around their father with such love. Each word was a lie, a polished stone in the monument they were building to their own fabricated virtue. Then, my children took the stage. David spoke first, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed emotion. He spoke of me as his hero, his mentor, the man who had taught him everything he knew about business. He spoke of the unbearable pain of watching his hero fade. It was a brilliant performance, a masterclass in public deception. He received a standing ovation. Emily followed, and her performance was even more devastating. She didn't speak of business. She spoke of love. She told charming, edited anecdotes from her childhood. She spoke of my patience, my kindness, my unwavering support. She wept, real convincing tears, as she spoke of her gratitude for every precious moment they had left together. The room was a sea of misty eyes and quiet sobs. Even I, the architect of this entire charade, felt a chill. Her ability to so completely disconnect from the truth was truly monstrous. "And now," David said, returning to the stage and placing a comforting arm around his weeping sister, "we have one final piece of business. It is a formality, but a necessary one. As you all know, my father's greatest wish is to ensure that the legacy he and my mother built is protected. In his current state, he has asked us, his children, to take on that burden, to become the stewards of his life's work." This was it. The moment the entire evening had been building towards. A lawyer I had never seen before, a man clearly hired for this single theatrical moment, walked onto the stage. He carried a leather-bound portfolio. In accordance with his wishes, the lawyer announced, his voice a grave, sonorous boom, "We have prepared the final documents, a full and irrevocable power of attorney, and the final transfer of his controlling shares in the company to be placed in a trust managed by his loving children, David and Emily." He opened the portfolio and produced the documents and a gold-plated fountain pen. The room was utterly silent, the guests witnesses to what they believed was a sacred final act of love and trust. David and Emily came to me, their faces a perfect blend of sorrow and resolve. They knelt before me, the documents held out like a holy text. "Dad," Emily whispered, her voice still thick with tears. "It's time. This is what you wanted. To know that everything is safe, that everything is taken care of. Just one last signature, and then you can rest. You can finally be at peace." They placed the pen in my trembling hand. I looked down at the signature line. I looked up at their faces, at their eyes, gleaming with a triumphant, predatory light that they could no longer conceal. They thought they had won. They thought the performance was over. I let my hand hover over the page for a long, dramatic moment. I let the camera zoom in. I let the entire room hold its breath. And then, with a weary sigh, I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the floor. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice a frail, confused sound. I can't. My hand, it's too weak. And my mind, it's so foggy. I don't think I understand what I'm signing." A wave of panic flashed across David's face. He quickly masked it. "It's okay, Dad," he said, his voice a little too loud. "It's just as we discussed. It's just to protect you." "Protect me?" I asked, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. But who will protect the company from you?" The question, so simple, so childlike, hung in the air like a poisoned dart. Before David could respond, before he could spin another lie, I turned my gaze to the back of the room and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was the signal. "Perhaps I can help clarify," a calm, authoritative voice said from the main entrance. The doors to the ballroom swung open, and my friend, Dr. Evans, walked in, flanked by two other men in dark, serious suits. He was holding a medical file, and he did not look like a man who was there to offer condolences. All heads in the grand ballroom swiveled towards the entrance. The arrival of Dr. Evans, my personal physician, flanked by two serious-looking men in dark suits, was an unscheduled, jarring interruption to the carefully orchestrated emotional climax of the evening. David and Emily stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and sudden animal fear. This was a variable they had not accounted for. "Dr. Evans?" David said, stepping forward, his voice a strained attempt at authority. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private family event." "I am aware," Dr. Evans replied, his voice calm and carrying a physician's natural authority. He did not stop walking until he reached the foot of the stage. He looked not at my children, but directly at me. "Arthur," he said, "I apologize for the intrusion, but I came as soon as I heard about this celebration. I felt it was my medical and ethical duty to be here." He then turned to address the stunned, silent audience. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Mark Evans. For the past 20 years, I have had the privilege of being Arthur Sterling's primary physician and his close personal friend. I am here tonight to provide a much-needed medical update." A wave of hushed whispers swept through the room. The guests leaned forward, their morbid curiosity piqued. They thought they were about to hear a tragic, detailed account of my final decline. "As many of you have been led to believe," Dr. Evans continued, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing with cold precision on David and Emily, "Arthur has been suffering from a terminal, degenerative illness. You have been told that he has, at most, 6 months to live." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. I saw Emily bring a handkerchief to her eyes, still playing her part. "As his doctor," Dr. Evans said, his voice now ringing with a powerful, clear authority, "I am here tonight to tell you that this is a complete and utter fabrication. It is a lie." The collective gasp from the audience was a physical force, a wave of pure shock. David's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy, furious red. "This is outrageous!" he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the doctor. "My father is a sick man. You are violating his privacy. You are breaking every ethical code." "On the contrary, David," Dr. Evans replied, his voice as sharp and sterile as a scalpel. "I am upholding my highest ethical code, to do no harm, and the greatest harm being done in this room is the cruel, psychological manipulation of a healthy man for financial gain." He opened the medical file in his hands. "These," he said, "are my father's actual recent medical records. A full physical, conducted last week. I have them here for any interested party to review. They show that Arthur Sterling, age 65, has the blood pressure of a man of 50, the bone density of a man of 40, and a cognitive acuity that would be the envy of anyone in this room. He is, in short, in perfect health." The revelation detonated in the room like a bomb. The narrative of the tragic, dying patriarch, so carefully constructed by my children, had just been vaporized by an irrefutable medical truth. The guests were now staring at David and Emily not with pity, but with a dawning, horrified suspicion. "But the tests," Emily stammered, her performance finally crumbling. "The scans, you showed them to us." "Yes," Dr. Evans said, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "I did. I showed you a set of falsified documents I created at your father's request. It was a test, Emily. A test of character. A test of love. A test which, I am heartbroken to say, you both have failed in the most spectacular fashion. This was the first act of my final performance. I had not just exposed their lie, I had revealed that I was the author of it. I was not the victim of their deception. I was the architect of theirs. The power dynamic in the room had just been completely, irrevocably inverted. I watched as the truth settled upon my children. They were no longer the loving, devoted children caring for their dying father. They were callous, greedy liars, exposed in front of a room full of the very people they had been so desperate to impress. Their faces were a ruin of shame, fury, and sheer, uncomprehending panic. They had walked onto a stage they thought was theirs, only to discover it was a trap, and the audience was not there to applaud them, but to witness their judgment. As the full weight of Dr. Evans's revelation settled upon the stunned room, I did something no one expected. I stood up. I rose from my deathbed wheelchair, not with the frailty of a sick man, but with the steady, solid posture of a CEO about to address his board. I calmly folded the blanket that had been my prop, placed it on the chair, and walked, my steps firm and sure, to the center of the stage. I took the microphone from the stunned event host. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. David and Emily stared at me, their faces a grotesque mixture of terror and disbelief. The ghost they had been trying to bury had just risen from the grave, perfectly healthy and very much in control. "Thank you, Dr. Evans," I began, my voice no longer the weak whisper of a dying man, but the clear, resonant baritone of the magician. "Your diagnostic skills are, as always, impeccable." I turned to my children. "You," I said, my voice cold and hard as steel, "wanted to celebrate my life. An excellent idea. So let's talk about my life. Let's talk about the assets you were so eager to liquidate." I gave a signal to Sarah Chen, my documentarian, who was standing with her crew at the back of the room. The giant screens that had, moments before, been showing sentimental family photos, now flickered to life. The first image was a high-resolution photograph of the signed contract for the sale of my house. "My home," I announced, "which you sold, for a fire sale price of $3 million to an anonymous investment group. A very efficient transaction. So efficient, in fact, that you never bothered to look into the name of that group. Allow me to introduce them." The screen changed. It now showed the corporate registration for the investment group. The name of the sole director was clearly visible. Arthur Sterling. "You sold my house," I said, my voice echoing through the ballroom, "to me. You were so blinded by your own greed, you couldn't see that you were simply the middleman in my own real estate transaction." A wave of shocked, almost hysterical laughter rippled through the audience. This was no longer just a family drama. It was a brilliantly executed corporate play, and they were loving every second of it. David's face was the color of ash, and my art collection, I continued, clicking the remote. The screen now showed the bill of sale to the private collector from Zurich. "Another swift, profitable deal for you. You sold a lifetime of my and your mother's passion for a quick, untraceable cash payment." The screen changed again. It showed a bank transfer. A large sum of money wired from one of my secure trust accounts to the collector in Zurich, dated the day before he bought my collection. "You see," I explained, as if lecturing a class of business students. "A good strategist never uses his own name. I funded the purchase of my own art. It is now resting safely in a vault under my name, not yours. The money you received, the money currently sitting in your bank account, is simply a portion of my own fortune that I have temporarily allowed you to hold." Emily let out a small, strangled cry. The full, beautiful, terrible scope of the trap was finally becoming clear to them. They hadn't earned a single penny. They had been nothing more than unwitting, unpaid employees in the complex, meticulous process of me restructuring my own assets. "You did all of this," I said, my voice dropping, filled with the weight of my disappointment, "because you were afraid. Afraid of not having enough. Afraid of not being enough. Your mother and I gave you a world without struggle. And in doing so, we robbed you of the chance to build your own strength. That was our failure. But your choice to prey on your own father, to dance on what you believed was his grave. That failure is yours and yours alone." I looked at them, at their shattered, pathetic forms. The magician had performed his final trick. There was no more to say. "And so," I announced to the room, This farewell party is now over. However, I would like to invite you all to a new celebration, the celebration of a new beginning. My lawyers will be in touch tomorrow to dissolve my former company and launch a new one, the Eleanor Sterling Foundation for Arts and Ethical Business. Its entire starting endowment, I said, looking directly at my children, will be the full, liquidated value of every asset you so kindly and efficiently sold on my behalf. Thank you for your excellent work. You are both, of course, fired. I set the microphone down. The silence in the room was broken by a single, startling sound. Applause. It started with one person, then another, then the entire room rose to their feet, not for a dying man, but for a man who had refused to let his life's work be destroyed by the very people he had created it for. It was the sound of justice. I walked away from that stage and did not look back. I left my children standing amidst the ruins of their own making, their faces a tableau of shock and public disgrace. I did not wait to hear their pleas or their accusations. The performance was over, and the magician had made his final clean exit. The aftermath was exactly as I had designed it. The story of the farewell party became the stuff of legend in the city's business and social circles. Sarah, Chen's documentary, which she titled The Magician's Final Act, was released online and went viral. It was a brutal, unflinching portrait of greed and a masterful study in strategic justice. My children were not just defeated, they were immortalized in their own shame. Their world collapsed. The money in their accounts, which was legally mine, was frozen and reabsorbed into my new foundation. They were left with nothing but the debts they had accrued in their frantic, foolish spending spree. Friends abandoned them. Business partners disavowed them. They became pariahs, ghosts haunting the fringes of a society that had once adored them. They tried to fight it, of course. They hired a lawyer and attempted to sue, claiming I had manipulated them, that I had subjected them to emotional distress. The lawsuit was summarily dismissed. A judge, after viewing a 5-minute clip from the documentary, ruled that their distress was a direct and foreseeable consequence of their own documented actions. The law, like the rest of the world, had no sympathy for them. I did not see them again. They sold what little they had left and moved away, disappearing into a quiet, anonymous life, a life stripped of the glamour and status they had valued above all else. They had been given a final, brutal lesson in the difference between wealth and worth. Whether they would ever truly learn it was no longer my concern. My duty as their teacher was done. My life, however, was just beginning. The Eleanor Sterling Foundation became my new passion, my final, greatest project. I poured all the energy, all the strategic skill I had once used to dismantle companies into building something new. We funded arts programs in underprivileged schools, provided grants to young entrepreneurs with ethical business plans, and created a mentorship program that paired seasoned executives with the next generation of leaders. My life was no longer about profit margins and hostile takeovers. It was about purpose. The house and the art collection, the physical remnants of my life with Eleanor, I donated them all to the foundation. My small, quiet apartment was all I needed. I had learned that the weight of great possessions is a burden, and I was, for the first time in my life, truly free. One day, about a year after the party, I was visiting a youth center the foundation had funded. I was watching a group of teenagers learn to code, their faces bright with an excitement and potential that was intoxicating. One of the instructors, a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, approached me. "Mr. Sterling?" she asked. I wanted to thank you. The foundation's grant didn't just buy us these computers. It gave these kids a future. The future is theirs to build, I replied with a smile. We are just providing the tools. As I was leaving, she stopped me one last time. "You know," she said, a little shyly, "we studied you in my business ethics class, The Magician's Final Act. It was required viewing." "And what was the lesson you took from it?" I asked, Genuinely curious, she thought for a moment. That the best way to predict the future, she said, a brilliant smile spreading across her face, is to design it yourself. I walked out of that youth center and into the warm afternoon sun, and I felt a sense of peace that no corporate victory had ever given me. My children had looked at me and seen only a past, an obstacle to be cleared away. They never realized that I was still designing the future. My promise to Eleanor was fulfilled. Her legacy was not a pile of assets to be fought over, but a living, breathing force for good in the world. They thought they were counting down the last 6 months of, my life. But in their greed, they had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all. They had given me a reason to truly live the rest of it. The magician had performed his final trick. He had taken their greed and transformed it, not into revenge, but into redemption, not for them, but for the legacy they had tried to destroy. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful illusion of all. If this story about strategy, justice, and the true meaning of legacy has inspired you, please show your support by liking and sharing this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where wisdom proves to be the greatest fortune of all. Thank you for watching.